Last summer, David and I had the incredible blessing of being invited to the Sun Valley Writers Conference. Has anyone been there who's in the room today? It's so special. So authors from all around the world are invited together to Sun Valley, Idaho, to this magnificent spot. And thousands of people come from all over the country and the world to just be in conversation with these authors and to witness the authors in conversation with each other. And so I was the new kid on the block, and it was really an incredible honor. One of the things that's so special about this gathering, I'm just going to take care of it now so you don't have to focus on when's she going to take off the talit. Hold on. Okay. So, back to the lead-in to my Torah study this morning. So one of the wonderful things about this conference that makes it so special is there are about 20 authors who are there, and they all have breakfast, lunch, and dinner together. It's like a dream for people who love books. And so you really get to know some of these other folks. Some of them are heroes of mine, people whose work I have read for so many years, people who helped me fall in love with reading, like Judy Blume. We got to spend several days hanging out with Judy Blume over breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and other wonderful people, Annie Lamott, and others. And I'm not here to name drop, but I will tell you that one of the authors on the list is a very famous novelist who writes thrillers. And I'm not a thriller kind of person, and so I thought before we went to the conference that I should read one of her books at least, just in case we sat next to each other over breakfast, lunch, or dinner. And I found that I actually am a thriller person. Like, I love it. It's a guilty pleasure of mine now. And so for those who know the genre well, you'll tell me if I'm getting this right. I think maybe I only like hers, but I have read now many of them. So they start in one of two ways. They either start with like the dead body and then the whole book is trying to figure out what happened, or they start with a seemingly random, extensive description of something that seems almost boring unless you realize that there's something that's just out of place. And later on, that little something becomes the key to solving the whole mystery. I don't know. So I've been reading now thrillers for less than a year, but it's changed the way I read Torah, and I'm going to tell you how today. By starting with one seemingly random detail that seems totally out of place, but might be the key to helping us understand a very strange murder mystery that takes place in the Torah. Okay, how's that? Okay. So in Parashat Emor, as you heard and maybe read if you were following along, here we are in the book of Leviticus. And you may have noticed there is an extensive list of and description of the holidays that really shape our Jewish calendar. It starts with Pesach, the festival of freedom. It goes on to Shavuot. Don't look at the papers yet. You'll see. It goes on from Pesach to Shavuot to the Omer, the period that we're in now, having just marked Lag BaOmer, the 33rd day of the Omer, with our big celebration Thursday night. It then goes on to Rosh Hashanah, to Yom Kippur, to Sukkot, and to everybody's favorite, Shmini Atzeret. It's a kind of systematizing of the holidays, with one exception. If you look down to the bottom of page 2 in your handout, you'll see a strange verse that appears in Leviticus chapter 23, verse 22, which you might not have noticed unless you've become a fan of thrillers, as I have. Because right in the middle of describing this system, Pesach, Shavuot, Omer, there's a break. And in that break, we get one verse that is strangely, though perhaps subtly, out of place. And that verse says the following: when you reap the harvest of your land, don't reap all the way to the edges of the field, or gather the gleanings of your harvest. Leave them for the poor and the stranger. I'm Lord your God. In the middle of an otherwise systematic description of each of the holidays and all of the holidays, we have a strange break to hear a random agricultural law about leaving the corners of our field for the stranger and for the poor, because God is God. Now, if you're reading carefully, you notice this, and you have to ask, what is this doing here? So I'm going to ask you, what occurs to you? Why might the author of the Torah have interjected this one verse about the ritual of Pe'ah, the ritual of leaving the corners, right in the midst of the cycle of the year? Let's throw out some ideas. Who said that? Hi, Muriel. Muriel said, well, it's an agricultural holiday. It makes sense that we have an agricultural law that's embedded in it, except that there are no other laws that are embedded randomly throughout the list of the other holidays that also, each of them have an association with some piece of our story. Okay, but that's a very good answer. Were you going to say something, Deb? Okay, it's not random at all. You can't talk about sheaves of grain, the Omer, and not talk about our responsibility to leave some for the poor. It's a very critical detail, not a random detail. One or two other ideas, yeah. Can you introduce yourself, Rabbi? Okay, this is great. So you were actually talking about this last night? Okay, great. So maybe, said Rabbi Jonathan Klein, maybe it's a reminder of the likelihood that we might engage in excess during the holidays. Maybe our personal observance becomes excessive in some way, and this is saying, be careful, folks. There's some ethical boundaries to your behavior. That's a very good idea. That's great. One or two more. Yes. That's great. Yochanan said, for those who couldn't hear, a kind of corollary to Rabbi Klein's idea, which is even when you are engaging in the holiest days, the holiest practices, remember that there are people in this community, and they might not be able to afford their own lulav and etrog. They might not be able to afford their own cheesecake. You leave the corners of your field for the poor. It's a kind of building an ethical reminder into the system itself. You cannot observe the holidays in a vacuum. You have to bring your attention to those who are part of your broader community. Yes? Okay, that's great. Even as we celebrate these very particular Jewish holidays, there are other people outside of our community, and they're still there. So we get very focused on what's happening in here. Don't forget the world out there. I love all of these. I'll tell you what Rashi says. Rashi says that in a way, you can look at this later, it's on page 3, but that in a way, the observance of Pe'ah, taking seriously these agricultural commandments, mitzvot, Pe'ah, Shichacha, and Leket, all of which are different forms on the same theme, we are actually doing such holy work that it is the equivalent of building the Beit HaMikdash itself, the temple in Jerusalem. That engaging in the work of leaving the corners of our field is as hard and as holy as building the temple itself. And in fact, several of the rabbis will argue that you might notice that Passover is a 7-day holiday or an 8-day holiday in diaspora. Sukkot is a 7-day holiday or 8 days in the diaspora. But Shavuot, the agricultural holiday, is only 1 or 2 days for us as our punishment for living in the diaspora. So it's actually only 2. So why is it not 8 like the others? Because of Pe'ah. Because the work of leaving the corners of the field is so holy, it takes the place of all of those holy days. It's so interesting, right? That in some way, this ethical standard is the equivalent of the holy work of ritualizing and celebrating the holidays. Still seems strange to me, I have to tell you. It still seems a little bit out of place, and all the more so once you get to the end of our Torah portion, and here's where the dead body appears. Okay. So the 24th chapter of Leviticus tells us the following, and here I am at the top of page 1 in your source sheet. It says, Vayetze ben Isha Yisraelit. There came out among the Israelites a man whose mother was Israelite and whose father was Egyptian. And a fight broke out. And this man, this half-Israelite, got into a fight with a whole Israelite. The son of the Israelite woman, this what they call half-Israelite, swore, used God's name in vain, blasphemed. He is known in our tradition as the Mekalel, the guy who cursed. That becomes his entire identity. As a result, the community under Moshe's ruling determines, and in fact, God determines, that the blasphemer needs to be taken out of the camp and stoned to death. And did anyone here get to the end of the parasha when we were reading just now? And so they do. They take the Mekalel out of the camp because he swore in God's name. He insulted God publicly, and they stone him to death. Every person in the community picks up a rock, and he dies. This could seem just to you. I don't know. It could seem just. There are rules. We don't blaspheme. We don't speak out against God that way. And the rule is, if you do, you die. And he did, so he died. But it seems like we're receiving some hints that there might be a slightly different or deeper story here that we need to pay attention to. If we looked carefully at this passage that I have for you, Leviticus 24, 10 to 16, some of those details might start to jump off the page. The first is the very strange way that this person, the Mekalel, is identified, that he's the son of an Egyptian man and an Israelite woman. The second might be, for example, that his mother's name is mentioned, Shlomit bat Divri, from the tribe of Dan. Why is that unusual? She is literally the only woman who's named in the entire book of Leviticus. And this is the context in which she's named, as the mother of a boy who's going to be killed because he blasphemes God. We're starting to see some clues come together that indicate to us that maybe there's something more going on here than what we might have thought. And that's when we have to do a little bit of real detective work. So we look back through the Midrash to Exodus chapter 2, verse 11. You, I'm sure, remember this moment in the narrative. Moses grew up, and he went out of the palace to see his kinsfolk, and he witnessed their labors. He went out and he saw the Israelites, the Hebrews, who were enslaved to Pharaoh at that time. He understood on some level that they were his family, they were his responsibility. And what does he see? An Egyptian man who is beating a Hebrew, one of his family members. So he turns this way and that, and he sees that nobody's there. And Moses, in this triumphant moment that is considered the moment of Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, our great leader's moral awakening, he strikes down the Egyptian who is beating the Israelite, and he buries him in the sand. Remember that story? Well, our rabbis, who were also detectives, draw a connection between that story in Exodus and our story today in the book of Leviticus. And they do this in a number of different passages and in a number of different ways, but I'll give you the gist of it now. The gist of it is that that Egyptian man was a taskmaster, and he saw a young Israelite woman, an enslaved woman, and he decided that he would have her for himself. And so the text says he sends her husband, an Israelite man, out into the field to work. He dresses up like the husband, and under false pretenses, he convinces this woman to sleep with him. She gets pregnant. This child is the baby of that union. This child is the baby of that rape. The Mekalel is a child of rape. Now, why are they fighting? Because the husband comes home, he understands what happened, he's full of rage and righteous anger. The two men go outside and start to fight, and the Egyptian is beating the Israelite man, the husband of the woman that he took under false pretense by force, and he's going to kill this man. And Moses' moral imagination is awakened, and he says, that's not right. And when he looks this way and this way in the text, the rabbis say that means he saw what happened at home and he saw what happened in the field. He understood what was happening, and he takes just action and punishes this man for what he's done. But that leaves the problem of a woman who's pregnant with the enslaver's child. That baby becomes a young man. The mother comes from the tribe of Dan. Now, in the desert, everybody lines up according to their tribes, right? But this child, young man, whose mother is from the tribe of Dan, his father's from outside the community altogether. And so he goes and says, I want my rightful portion. I want to build my tent with the camp of my mother's family. And Moses says, no, there's no room for you here. We decide tribe by the father, not by the mother. So while Jewish identity, Hebrew identity comes from the mother, tribal identity comes from the father. So Moses says to this guy, there's no place for you here. There's no place for you in our community. And that's why this young man goes out and curses God. Because God created a legal system with Moses in which there could be a person, through no fault of their own, who has no place in this society. Now, I'll tell you why I was hung up on this all day yesterday. It really upset me that this story came after the instruction about payah. Because those agricultural rules about leaving the corner of your field, about understanding that you can't achieve holiness, if there's anyone who's hungry, who's a stranger, who's an outsider, every one of them is essential to your observance, to your practice. That ruling should have come after the story of the Mekalel. We should have seen the mistake, the failure of leadership, the failure of law to see and protect this man, and then been given the rules. Nobody is outside the bounds of our community. But that's not the way the Torah says it. And we're forced to reckon with what the Torah gives us, not what we wish it did. So I'm struggling with this. I'm struggling with how it is that a system that predicts social hierarchies that are so profoundly unjust, that some have utter abundance and some have nothing, a system that can predict and envision that society and create a corrective, cannot see its way to recognizing the humanity of the Mekalel, a guy who slips through the cracks. And in speaking with my two chavrutas this week about this, David and Rabbi Panitz, this is what I come to. Our Torah ends on a low note. Our Parashat this week. It ends on a low note in which the people and the leadership and the law all fail. And they kill a man who should be alive and who should have a place in this society. And the reason that all of those elements fail is because the laws of payah are not ambitious enough. Because what they do is they protect the social hierarchy that allows it for some people to have abundance and some people to have nothing, in which those people who have nothing get the scraps. They get the corners of the field, so at least they won't die of starvation. But it does nothing to fundamentally challenge the unjust system itself. The beginning of next week's Parsha, though, does. That's where we see the introduction of the laws of Shemitah, where every 7th year the land is actually powerless. It's not that the poor people can come and grab what's left on the corners. It's that they share in ownership of the land as much as the person whose backyard it is. This is a total upheaval of the world as it is. And that's before we even get to the Yovel, that every 50th year, all of the holdings go back to the original owner. This is the radical intervention in the social reality that these Israelites, former slaves, are going to build when they get to the land. Now, why do I care so much about that now? Why am I asking us right now to not settle for the subtleties of payah, which insists that we leave the corners of the field, but instead inviting us to see the failure of the subtle fixes when what we need is a radical transformation of the world as it is. Why am I asking us to do that when words like comprehensive immigration reform and Medicare for all seem further from the possible reality than ever before? Because it was also so far from the reality of the Israelites in the desert. None of them were landowners yet. They were wanderers in the desert. And they had the chutzpah to articulate a dream of a different kind of world. Not a world in which we would subtly and quietly try to remedy around the edges and then fail so badly that someone who doesn't fit into our very narrow understanding of the world ends up dead. No, our ancestors did something so brave. They said, we understand that these small tweaks will fail us all. What must we do? We must dream of a revolution. We must articulate what those core and fundamental and foundational values are, because one day we will no longer be in this desert. And we've talked a lot in this space over the last several months about how our work is to plant the seeds now and to protect the seeds of a better future, an abundant future, a fair and just future. And the more it seems that that vision of the future is being decimated by the policies and the politics and the cruelty and the callousness of our reality today, the more important it is for us to be brave and keep articulating them. So I'm allowing the failure of this week's Parashat to resolve for us a truly unjust reality, because this story doesn't end here. And next week, the big dream comes. I want to invite us on this Shabbat to be brave with each other, to speak the words about the big dream, even when the current reality is quashing our spirits. Imagine this as a spiritual practice. When you feel the greatest amount of despair, to say the most chutzpahdik dream in your heart out loud to someone who will take you seriously. And if you don't have anyone in your life who will do that, tell it to me. Tell it to someone you sit with at Shabbos lunch. Because this is not the time for small thinking. This is the time for big dreams. And we have to dream those dreams together. Shabbat shalom.